Hey there beautiful people, welcome back to the channel where I deal with everything photo and video related. And before I get into it, please do not forget to like, share and subscribe, and also turn on that notification button. That is the biggest support that you can accord me. Today I'm going to do something that I've never done before, which is talk about a new camera release and why I would recommend this camera to each and every filmmaker, from beginners to professionals. And this is a camera that personally I was waiting for. A few weeks ago I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine about different cameras, and at the time Canon had released the Canon R7, which is a 4K camera which shoots 4K 60 frames per second in camera. It produces 10-bit color, and also it shoots in C-Log3 in camera, and you all know that Canon has amazing autofocus in it. So this camera was actually really appealing to me, and these were some of the main things that I really wanted in a camera that I would use. The reason why I was excited because of this Canon release is because I knew that Sony will soon reply to that, and boy did they reply big time. Well, to give you my backstory, for you to be able to understand why this release was very important for me, is because I've been a Sony APS-C sensor user for the longest time, and I've loved using the Sony A6400 for all these years. And very many people don't believe that I use this specific camera to produce the content that I do produce because of the high quality videos and the high quality images that it gives me. Unfortunately, the A6400 had a few problems that I didn't like, or let me call them a few disadvantages that I didn't like about it. Let me mention them to you. It shot in 4K, which is very high quality 4K, but it only did that in 30 frames per second. Well, I use slow motion in my videos a lot, and pairing these two resolutions, which is 1080p for slow motion and 4K for the main shots, I don't think they paired really well. Someone would really notice that the performance shots were higher quality compared to the slow motion shots, and that really took away from my projects. The second disadvantage that I had with the Sony A6400 is the fact that it only shot in 8-bit color. This really limited me when it came to the color grading process, because you can't really push and pull those colors to achieve this Hollywood style kind of color grading. You had a limitation with it, so I didn't like the 8-bit color. So as I predicted, when Canon released the Canon R7, I clearly knew that Sony is going to make a reply, and they did the biggest reply ever in the land of APS-C sensor cameras. They released the Sony FX30. Sony actually over-delivered on my expectations. I initially thought they're going to just improve the Sony A6600 and come up with a Sony A6700, which is a basic APS-C camera, and just improve with the 4K, slow motion and all that kind of stuff, but they over-delivered on my expectations. Sony actually made an APS-C cinema camera, which actually resembles the Sony FX30. Well, if you don't believe me, listen to these specs and tell me if this is not the best release this year. The Sony FX30 is a Super 35 APS-C sensor cinema camera that costs only $1,800 as per advertised. Can you believe that? Talk about affordability. Something else is that the sensor in this camera is actually a 6K sensor downsampled to 4K. So that means the footage that comes out of this camera is super sharp and very detailed. Well, remember initially I was asking for Sony to at least put 4K 60 frames per second on an affordable camera? Sony actually looked at me and said, my friend, no, I'm going to give you 4K 120 frames per second in camera just to shut me up for a while. The 4K 120 unfortunately has a major crop on it, but that is not really a problem for me because it doesn't lose any quality for me. You can basically just buy a wider lens to compensate for that. Remember how I am very limited with the 8-bit color profile found in the Sony A6400 that I'm using currently? Well, Sony gave the FX30 10-bit 422 color. That basically means that I can push and pull my colors to whatever I want without compromising my video quality. And this Sony FX30 offers 16-bit raw footage, but only when you record externally, like on an Atomos Ninja or something. And it also uses the bigger Sony batteries. That means the battery life in this camera is way better. And the build quality of this camera is on another level. It has built-in threads all around the camera, so you can hook up your monitors and other accessories without investing on a camera cage. But I will still advise you invest on a camera cage because it adds more threads and it gives the camera more protection. The Sony FX30 has the Cine AI profile, which most Hollywood producers use to preserve the most dynamic range in their footage to help during color grading, with a dual base ISO of 800 and 2500 respectively. Because it is an APS-C sensor camera, that means the cost of your lenses is going to be very low. And personally, I've invested in a lot of APS-C lenses, so this camera is perfect for me as a cinema camera. Something else that I loved about this new release is the fact that Sony involved African creators to test out this camera before it was released. That was a very rare thing to see, and I enjoyed it. Previously, we used to wait for new cameras for ages before they got to us, but this time I was very happy to see new releases that were tested in Africa by African creators. Now, my verdict is basically that this is my dream camera because it is a cinema camera and it is very affordable. And something else that I hope is that when that camera gets to us, especially here in Kenya, I hope the prices does not go up to twice the amount that was advertised, because that will lose its purpose. Well, I'll be keeping an eye on this camera, and when I manage to get my hands on this camera, I will basically test it out for you guys and give you my honest opinion about it. So thank you for your audience, thank you for your time, and see you next time.